we go. Yeah.
I would argue that you can get into physical confrontation with colleagues also over citations. So it is also physically demanding because you need to run very fast to get away.
That is a good point, Maggie.
Who are your friends, Maggie? This is frightening. We need to get you other people. Welcome, everybody. Oh, let me put the notes page in the chat. We actually, it's looking a little sketchy, the notes, but once we start typing it, it'll look like it's more full. So it's got all the required elements for the start. And just please add your name. And if you happen to be new, well, we'll have your email, but just make sure you give us your contact information so that we can stay connected with you. Oh, it's so good to see everybody. Hello.
Yeah, and apologies to everybody for the long hiatus.
I had to request access for the Google Doc.
All right, Deb, I think that's you.
Yeah, hang on. I'm going to just open it up to everybody with the link.
Okay.
And actually, I guess I'll just open up this whole folder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think everybody needs
everybody
to get
with the link.
folder. Yeah, that'd be cool. Thanks. Oh, the UK folks are here. Ian, hello. John, hello. I'm sure there's others. Hello. Thanks for coming.
Greetings.
Jörg is so nice to see you, Jörg. Were your ears burning? I was talking about you to Deb the other day. Oh, how awesome you are. Oh, and Germany's here, of course. I'm looking at Kirsten Elgar. I haven't said hello yet. Kirsten, I'm sorry. I'm not going to be in person at EGU. I couldn't manage it. I'm so sorry.
It would be, Kerstin is coming, and I'm really looking forward. I'm going in person.
Okay.
Vienna in May is amazing.
Yes, yes. Well, JPG is at the same time, so the juggling of time zones is going to be like mind blowing. But yes, please have a good time.
I will, definitely.
Yes.
You will be presenting virtually, I guess.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Because I remember you have two talks in my sessions. Well, Chris and you.
Yes. Yes. I did register, so I am registered. All is well there.
Great.
All right. Okay. We're 3 minutes after, Deb. Are you ready to kick off? Do we have an open folder yet?
We have an open folder, and I just gave everybody with the link edit access, so you should all be able to edit it now.
Okay, try again. Refresh your windows, all the usual stuff.
Okay, Bruce has a thumbs up, and I see a few nods, so
right.
Okay.
Awesome.
I think we now have the permissions right. Sorry about that. It was about 11 or midnight when I was creating a lot of this stuff in the folder. All right. Should we wait till 5 after to get started? 6.
We can. I'm seeing Matt Cannon. Matt, hello. And Megan, thanks for coming. You, of course. Oh, I saw the software folks have you in mind, Megan. I just came off of a Force 11 meeting where they were talking about your work. So just watch for that to come your way.
Oh, okay. That's good to hear. Thank you for letting me.
Yep. Just a heads up. Yeah. So if, data citations plus software citations, just bring it on.
Yeah. Well, we have software in the data citation index already. So
brilliant. You can tell them that when they get you. So that's awesome. Thanks for that.
Okay, I just repasted the links. And somebody will have to do that again in a few more minutes after,
Yep.
because I see more people are still joining.
Yep.
Um,
There was over 50 that registered, but not everybody's time zones will jive. So looking good.
and thank you to those of you whose time zones don't jive. We really appreciate you making the effort anyway. I think this is really important. And thankfully you all do too. All right, so I will get the presentation up. Just give me a moment. We've been working on something where we have intricate animations and all sorts of other crazy PowerPoint things, and I've realized that if I do any showing it through Google Drive, it's horrendous. So I'm going to go find it in my actual drive. So it'll take a moment.
Oh, while you're doing that, quick promo, we are going to ask for this group to instantiate within RDA's working group so that we can get more eyes on our progress and add more people. So I've been a little slow, but I almost have the charter fully drafted. We've gotten some feedback from the coordinating team, and so to just watch for it, and then we'll give you an invite to jump in and join that group, and then we'll use that as one of our platforms if we get accepted.
Okay, there we go. Just get some windows out of the way. All right, so I thought we'd start with a little bit of a reminder and background. I know we've got a few new people, and many of us have not thought about this stuff for 6 months. So we'll just start there, and then we'll dive into the current place where we are. So Shelley, Carolyn, Chris, and I have been organizing this effort. And you know, just as a reminder, this group is meant to actually work on a large number of data citation challenges. And a big thank you for Shelley to bringing us all together to do these things. But our first place where we've started is really on trying to enable large numbers of data set citations. So this is a case where you're creating a research product like a paper, and you're trying to publish with citations that are, you know, more than 100, more than a couple hundred. Right now, that forces you into the supplementary materials, other places. This is an intent to start looking at how we fix that. And this isn't up to date, but this is a view that we'd put together for AGU of sort of the broad set of people that are involved in this, and helping to look at how we do this. And we're going to talk some about the use cases, so I wanted to just bring them up here. For me, it started with Ameriflux, which is also FluxNet for the global community, where we have a large number of individual sites collecting data over the last, some as long as 28 years have been collecting data. And each of them requests that they have an individual citation. So when somebody uses the set for the Americas or the global set, they're already talking about several hundred citations at minimum. So the other two use cases, actually, James or Justin, do you want to give a quick intro to your use case?
Yeah, I'll give a quick. So the use case we have is we have sensors that go from platforms, and we get data streams off these sensors, and then putting sort of a accession level DOI on these. But then we have finer granularity underneath these data streams And if someone has a subset or an aggregated set, how do they bring back the for use of the paper? How do they then cite that? How much detail do they then have to go into the paper to explain that they took a subset of a cruise that went across the Atlantic when they only used the bit that was in, say, the North Sea or something like that, and which data streams that they're using? So how can they inform the users of the data that they're using from a subset of larger data sets? And also
Thank you.
aggregates as well, so combining data sets as well.
Thank you so much, James. Martina, do you want to describe your use case?
Yes. So my use case is related to the sixth assessment report of the world climate, which was published last year by the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. We introduced our FAIR guidelines, or our approach to make the report and the results more fair. And the motivation was to enhance the transparency of the AR6, to enable traceability and of the results, and to make the figure creation reproducible. And so our use case is centered around the creation of figures. You will see that I have made some changes for the reliquary use case because I just didn't have all the information on figure basis. So I moved that to the chapter base, but that's not so different. So from the organizational point, we have 3 parts of the AR6 report with 3 working groups. We have chapters which organize themselves and which can be cited. And on the data side, we have the data distribution center, which is jointly managed by currently 4 partners. So that's more the organizational part of the use case.
Thank you so much, Martina and James. So I think these use cases sort of already bring that to the fore, this fact that you've generally got data sets, you've got other papers you're trying to cite, you've got software you're trying to cite, and that's the challenge, is figuring out how to have all these be first-class citations, not in the supplementary materials, not in some other document, not often some, not having to always write a data paper just to be able to write an actual paper. So that objective is to enable those large number of citations, allow that citation of large groups of research objects. You heard that in the use cases. And key to this is empowering individuals, because it's an individual writing that paper that has all those citations that they need to do. And enable that the credit and tracking works, that these can all be treated as primary citations. So you heard already the mention of the word reliquary. That's because we were trying to pick a name to use in this interim while we're figuring it out that nobody else is currently using. If we said collection, if we said most of the other, container, most of these other words, they already have a context, they already have an instantiation in something in the space. Thanks to Carolyn for helping find the word. Reliquary has worked amazingly well. It brings a smile to everybody's face when we say it, which is also another key element of doing anything related to standards. You want everybody to still be smiling somewhere along the way. So the starting assumptions is that there'll continue to be limits on too many of the research objects in terms of how many citations we can include in them. And so we do need this alternate mechanism. The credit is really important for those research objects. And as you heard from Martina, traceability is also critical. And that's another part of all of this. And then it's important to enable that to individual research objects. And they need to be countable, and it needs to be easy to do. and I realize those seem diametrically opposed. So that's the challenge, is figuring out how do we find that middle ground where it's easy to do, it gives all the right breadcrumbs, but it doesn't require a PhD in computer science to build the thing. So the properties, that it has a unique identifier, well-defined citation components, that each object in there has a unique identifier and enough metadata and things to be able to find it. And the types of those roles can be defined and in a well-defined way. And that if the reliquary appears in a paper, that it's citable and the items in it are citable. And then it can contain many different sources that, I think what I'd very much like to see is that our reliquaries can be bringing together items from many different places and not just from a single repository or a single thing. That's certainly one of the use cases as well, but for many papers, you're actually pulling from a large number of sources. And then it allows that tracking of the primary citation, and that the access to an object is, you're able to make that access just by looking at the reliquary and finding that individual citation, that gives you enough information to always find that object. So we've actually, over the course of this period, we've discussed many of the existing mechanisms that are potentially ways that we could implement a reliquary. And where we're at right now is in November. We'd gone through and I had created an example that basically tries to say, just as a like back of the envelope, what would a reliquary look like, right? So this was just sitting down and saying, what is the information I want to capture in my reliquary, and what would that look like? So I'll walk through mine, but this is sort of a rough view of what that looks like. And we also pulled together a subgroup to sort of, get that together. So we'd been meeting for a couple of months at the end of the year in 2021 to do that. This is now bringing it back to the larger group. So I know for many of you, you thought we'd all gone away and we're never coming back. Sorry about that. We are back now. And just for a reminder, these are some of the references for where to get stuff. And this is all in the folder that we shared, and hopefully somebody will paste that folder link in the chat again so that everybody can get a hold of that. So let me stop this share and let me bring up my. So what we're going to do now is walk through our reliquary examples. And I thought I'd go ahead and start first. So I'm going to bring up that reliquary one. Oh, that's right. I did it in G Sheet. Sorry. This should work. Sorry, it's been long enough since we met that I was trying to remember what we did. Okay. All right, so you should now all be able to see that. And so this looks just like the slide that I had, but the whole idea is that there's a DOI on this object, that it has its own citation, that it has an author. So in this case, I just made it the Ameriflux Management Project because here I was imagining the reliquary that we might make ourselves as Ameriflux to just define our broad collection. Because I think that's one of the use cases where we're making a reliquary that's made by a repository or a project, and where people can use any number of the elements in it. So there's the title, a description. So I tried to follow sort of something like the data site guidelines and some of the other guidelines that we have for citation. There's a data availability statement, and then these are the reliquary citations. So obviously you'd want those to be hyperlinks as well, but this was literally just a cut and paste job. So I was able to build this thing in, under an hour, because I could just get all these citations out. But you can already see, even at a couple hundred, this would not have fit in a paper. All right, let's get down to the bottom. And then we had some other fields, data generation information, any data subset information. That was an attempt to sort of give a forward reference for Justin and James. We'll see whether they used it. So I'm going to stop the share. And let's go ahead and move to who's ready? Martina or James and Justin? Who wants to go next? Oh, Kirsten has a question first.
Yeah, it would be great if I can put the question, because you just showed the spreadsheet. My question is, I've seen that the authors of these citations in the reliquary are different. And I know that it is very important for authors, but especially for institutions who are running larger networks like GNSS networks or others, that they get the credit. So my question is, will you include all the citations and the DOIs of the reliquary citations as related identifier in the DataCite metadata?
So that was a mistake of mine. Let me go back to share, because in fact,
Oops.
She's gone.
It was aliens. I'm not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens.
Busy people hitting the wrong button.
Okay.
She's gonna be so embarrassed when she gets back.
She will come back,
And
definitely.
we've all never done that one before.
Poor
helpful safety tip: when leave meeting is right next to the one you meant to press, don't press leave meeting. Okay, let's go back to the reliquary,
That
because
was a quick recovery there, Doug.
yeah, luckily I'd pasted all the information into my calendar so I could run back to that. So what I failed to show, because I had blown things up a little bit, is that actually right next to every citation was a separate column that is their unique identifier. Sorry, it's a little bit hard to scroll across. So the unique identifiers are there, and the whole idea is that the indexer, the idea and why the indexers are also here is to try to make it so that it works with the indexer, such that when they're indexing this reliquary, everything that's cited in this reliquary, they're going to that individual unique identifier and pulling the full citation information from that source. They're treating it as if those individual items were in the citations.
Okay, but why are you not using the existing and well-known DataCite model? You can say is derived from, and because I think that when you describe that somehow the citation metrics people need, they would need to develop means to read through the reliquary, but using the DataCite schema related identifier and then defining or it has part. I would choose has part, for example, as relation type, and then you would have it in the XML metadata, and then it can come into Scholix and into all these things that people are developing for years.
So Kirsten, that's a fantastic comment. What I want to do is go through the 3 use cases, and these are exactly the things we want to talk about, because the idea that I had is make it as simple as possible, and then let's add complexity as needed. So that's part of why I didn't try to add anything that I didn't absolutely think was underlying, just dead essential, because then we can talk about all the things I'm missing. Because I'm sure Martina and James and Justin ran into lots of challenges where they didn't have everything they needed to do it and probably already have decorated them out. So who wants to go first and go next?
I have to leave early. Maybe it's good
So Martina?
if I do it first. So let me try to share my screen. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
So my use case is based on one chapter of the report, and just to give you some information on how it is organized. So there are different reports, a summary, a technical summary, a full report, and so on. And what I have used to create the example is the supplementary material for one chapter and some information on the dataset list that we get from the TSU for archival. So it was a bit of editing around, and that's why it's more an example case. So it's not complete, not by far. It's just giving some samples to just give an idea on the variety of different inputs that we have for this chapter. So it's very similar to the use case where we create figures. So you will have a similar list of information there, but here for the chapter, it was just easier. So the reliquary is then citable. It will be citable as the same, with the same authors as the chapter itself. So I made this DOI up, and this is just a bit of information. The different kind of citations I found when I just looked into the supplementary material is really, there are some data which is published in a data journal and should be cited that way. If you see number 3, there are some which are only URLs. So there's not even a DOI cited with the data. And I don't know what this in the middle is, but it is published in a regular journal, so not a data journal. And the other pieces here is the CMIP6 data, which is published via the DKRZ. So it's available in ESGF, and we provide the citation information. Maybe one information back. CMIP6 data is used only in a small part. So there are, say, a handful of variables or data sets which are used from each model run. So you have a couple of identifiers, PIDs, on data sets for each model run or each DOI. So this is a bit of the background for what you see here. So this is only the citation information. It's not the dataset information and not directly the content. And as Deb said, there is a data subset information in the template, and I was really, grateful for you, Deb, that you created that, because that's exactly what we can use. So I made it up in the end to just select 3 variables and with 3 handle IDs, which are related to number 4, which is just here one of these model runs, which is citable by the DOI. So this is how I filled it up, to have both information in there. One, how to cite the information, and then how to identify the data set within this large collection, or I have abbreviated that. So there are more than 24 citations for chapter 10, and there are more than these handles. So I just didn't want to do that manually. the last piece is what we agreed in the IPCC, that the chapter is cited. So we have one, which is the printed version, which is in press, that's the official citation. And there will be a digital version online. And if that's online, I will cite it. So it will be more than the PDFs. So it will really be a digital version. And when that's available, it makes sense to cite it. And this is the complete report. So the agreement is to cite chapters and cite the full report. Yeah, and with that, I think that's my example. Any questions, or have I left out something which was not understandable?
I'm actually impressed you managed to fit the information you most needed in what I put together so far, because it was just a guess. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Martina.
It was great to have these two parts, the citation and the subset part. And I think that's really required for our use case.
Awesome. So Maggie, do you wanna make your comment before we go on?
No, we can pick up on that afterwards.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, James or Justin?
If Justin's in another meeting, so it's just me. Let's share screen. Share. So I'm going to confess I haven't had a look at this since we first created this, and I've noticed something that we maybe missed, which I think comes to Kirsten's question earlier. We went through the same sort of pattern as Martina, with the sort of reliquary DOI leads to landing page that has the information of the reliquary citation. So Justin and I created this reliquary based on some data from a project called Orchestra with some high-level text, the description, and this could be sort of slightly more automated and a bit lighter than potentially a data site DOI. With the data availability statement, data cited in this reliquary are openly available. You could potentially point to a specific license. Then with the ID, we had a list of reliquary IDs. This is based on the data stream idea or element that we had, where we receive an accession level DOI and we have data granules which have a PID on them. And these are the data originators of the data they provided, and text associated to the metadata that we have. And we provide the data granule, which is effectively that little number there, and the samples there, which is sort of the different routes through our systems. We also have some additional data from a different format, so 3 sort of different routes from our data system, or 4 different routes from our data system. And then some generation information, how were they generated? So this is just through the mechanisms that they were obtained and the related identifiers. So this would be sort of the identifier system, or the type of identifier, so DOI, EPIC, the type of identifier it is. Here the related identifier, so we had the paper and the relationship. This is where I think potentially what Kirsten was saying about maybe we could tighten this up with the relationship linking to the data site relationship of is referenced by, or the site, or for this it would be describes objects 1 to 4. So we'd have 4 entries there potentially, is what I've noticed since following Kirsten's question. But we had the relationship between the paper DOI that describes the system that the data obtained, and then the project data papers. And the underlying DOIs, this points to the credit of the underlying DOI from the originators and the citable data. We only had this for 6 to 10 because we're saying that potentially for 1 to 5 we didn't have an accession DOI because they're legacy data or something like that, so we'd be missing that citable accession DOI from the originator. And then you have the ORCID and the sort of high-level metadata of the PID. And that's the way that we've approached that with the relationships.
So Maggie, before we go to your question, I guess I want to ask Martina and James a quick question. Are there other things, I see that James and Justin, you added a few things to sort of match some of the aspects of your use case that weren't covered. Were there other major things that as you were working through your use case that you felt, major sections, major things that were missing that you needed?
No, I think, well, from my perspective, I think we just you reuse what you put there and maybe need to expand that a little bit to tighten what we're trying to showcase there. But I don't think anything was, it was just that was missing, I think, tightening of how we describe that relationship that Kirsten mentioned.
Yeah, from my side, the same. There was nothing missing. I think we need a bit of refinement and to agree on how to use the fields, but I think everything is pretty much there. Might be added with some of the fields that James and Justin added, which are good ideas to have the PID type or something, which might be easier for machines. So yeah, that's my
Okay, so now to general discussion. Maggie, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, so just a few questions first to this BODC case. So I note that you put these PIDs there for the components, and then you say PID type handle. But surely these PIDs are not handles.
Yeah, so that's our potential vision, potentially a handle ID that we would link to, or have a mirror of how we generate the PIDs. At the moment, they are not PIDs. Yeah, sorry, they are not currently PIDs. They're how we envisage. They're our current granules and how we'd like them to be PIDs.
They could be PIDs if you use sort of persistent URLs or cool URI type of system. And I do think that we should not exclude other types of persistent identifiers and persistent identifier systems than handles or those types. I think that would be dangerous to do that. Although, of course, at the moment, I guess the majority, at least in natural sciences, are using handle-based or handle-based types of PIDs. So I think that's important. My other comment in general to all of these things is that, of course, machine actionability is very, very important. So there would have to be stringent use of controlled vocabularies, etc., for all of these fields to really make sure that there are no misunderstandings. But a great start. Congratulations to all of the use cases.
Thank you, Maggie. Kirsten?
Yeah, I would like to add on that I really like the idea or the model to use handle or other URI-based PIDs for several data and not using DOI for all these. If the data are assigned with DOI, this is fine, but we have a use case at GFZ, for example, where we use handle identifier for identifying instruments. And they can be cited also in the data site metadata. And although within one repository, you may have the possibility to really make a clear hierarchy of, okay, there's the reliquary and this is what you use. If you assign DOI to all your subsamples or your content of the reliquary, and you would take a look at the DataCite catalog, you would just see them all next to each other without any notification about the whereabouts, about the belonging to. And this is another challenge. And I really like the idea of using handles that are higher granularity and then combining them with a DOI.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. Martina.
Yeah, a comment on the usage of handles. Maybe I can describe our use case. So we use the handles on a granularity on which data is not cited. So it doesn't make sense in a paper to just use one variable from one model. You cannot really use it for a proper analysis. So we have it more for the identification, and it's really, there's very few metadata attached to it, just to identify the object. And what we are just doing at the moment is that we add the related DOI to the handle metadata so that we have the linkage between the handle and how to cite it in the context of the model run. So we will have that linkage for the analysis as well. And I think that's one of the problems with handle IDs, that the standards are developing. We have the PID registry, but DOIs are really standardized with metadata. You know how to use it. It's well established. And for handles, we have a bunch of different usages of handles, especially if we go to the metadata. And if we have standards, it will be much easier to incorporate them. But we certainly should not restrict ourselves to DOIs. So that's where I agree with Maggie.
Right.
I would just like to say that I think we should be a bit careful when we sort of wave around terms like handles on one side and DOIs on the other, because I really have to insist that they are both basically depending on the same handle technology. What you mean are really handles with a minimal metadata associated with the MathPID registry level.
Right. And
I was referring to citing the objects, and then you need at least information on how to cite it. And not every handle has that at the moment. That was what I was.
Exactly. But as long as we are clear about that in all communications, then that's fine. But there is nothing wrong or impossible with using a basic handle in a citation string if the relevant information is there.
No, I think that's an excellent point, and I think I mean that's the idea of this meeting, is to figure out what's missing, what needs to change. I literally sat down one evening and just said, if I think we can do this, I should be able to sit down with a spreadsheet and just create one. and that's literally what that first one for Ameriflex was. So this is fantastic. So Martina, did you have a second or a response? And by the way, I'm going to give us a procedure. It's been working in another group that I have. So if you have a new topic, you raise your hand. If you have a response to something that's been said, use the reactions. You can hit the little green yes check mark. Hopefully you have one of the latest versions of Zoom up, so that way we can stay on topic and respond to things, and then bring up a new topic. Okay, so Mark, you have a response.
Yeah, I would just like to, I guess, reinforce this general approach. This general approach is actually quite common from what I've seen. So, and it's not necessarily always handles, but that there are sub-IDs within a collection. In the planetary data system, some of the nodes, I think like the ring node, they have their own internal IDs, but they're older than handles, right? You know, they're as old as the planetary data system, and they're using that for their referencing the details. At NSIDC, I don't know if they're still doing this, but we started using ARCs for this purpose. And ARCs are really nice because you control them internally. You don't need to rely on, I mean, you can set up your own handle server as well, but you don't have to rely on the central registry, which, you know, has pros and cons, but that has features like suffix pass-through, where you can give sort of a pattern and refer to stuff below a certain suffix. I'm not very detailed on how that works, but there's a lot, but ARCs have a lot of flexibility in that regard. And they're used really extensively in the library, museums, archives community, very much for this sort of thing for a subset. And then finally, just to note, and this isn't typically for the credit use case, although it has been used for that, is the RDA dynamic data citation approach, where you put a identifier, typically a DOI, on a query, which is, you know, dynamically produced, but then you have a parent DOI with that, which is the collection level. And people have done this for identifying granular level credit, like with citizen science archives, where, you know, you say, okay, this observation was actually collected by this person and it gets this DOI. And then finally, MAST, the Mikulski Archive for Space Telescopes, something like that, does the same sort of thing where they generate a DOI on demand. And in this case, it's not necessarily a subset. It can be, you know, a combination of observations from multiple telescopes that someone's studying a particular part of the sky and they're looking at it from several telescopes and they create an aggregate, and that gets a DOI. They haven't really teased out the credit piece of that, but I guess I'm just reinforcing that this general approach of nested identifiers, not necessarily DOIs, is pretty common. So it's something that I think we could build on. And maybe gets to Martina's point, is the issue then is the metadata. And I think, to Kirsten's point, the really critical metadata piece here is the linkage. It's the verb. It's the predicate between, you know, it has part, is derived from, whatever it might be. You know, starting to think of building it out as a graph using these different IDs. So just some random thoughts, but that emerged from the latest discussion.
Thanks, Mark. Carolyn.
I want to kind of piggyback on something Mark said, and also going back to Maggie's comment in the chat about older data sets that may or may not have legacy metadata attached to them that might need cleaning up, looking at, maintaining. And then we were talking, Bruce made the comment that, you know, we should have a tombstone page for dead DOIs. So all of this is kind of going back to that identifiers, metadata, they are all living things that need to be maintained. You can't just, with like the Ron Popeil oven, you can't just set it and forget it and park it and then 20 years later and expect it to be still viable and useful. I'm wondering if this is something that this community should pay a little bit of attention to, is sort of the historical accuracy of the identifiers and the metadata surrounding some legacy data sets, because as we all know, historic information is still good information in a lot of, I mean, we need to keep this stuff alive and maintain it. We spend a lot of money and a lot of time collecting this data. So I'm wondering if that's maybe a slight subdirection we could go in the next several months. That's it.
Thanks, Carolyn. James.
Yeah, just picking on the point about the dynamic DOIs, they're very good, and there is a lot of stuff out there. I suppose part of the things we were looking at was the ease at which people can do this. So rather than having the infrastructure of having to support the dynamic elements of the DOIs, this was to allow interoperability, like different repositories, to access data from different repositories rather than having one repository and being able to pull the information together. But the underpinning sort of theory behind it from our sort of use case is all very, very similar to the dynamic stuff that Mark was mentioning.
All right. So I think that what I haven't heard is, oh my God, that's a load of crap. So that's nice. It's always nice to see when we're actually getting suggestions for how we might improve the thing that we started with. So Martina.
Yeah, just a comment because I have to leave to bring up a topic in here and then leave. What we experienced in the IPCC when collecting information on this fine granularity, so which data sets were used, we are fighting with errors. And I think it's due to missing tools to do that easily. So there are a few tools that were developed by the community which take care of which data sets were used and write provenance records. But most of the authors are self-organizing. They just get the data sets together, create their figures, and in the end, they are asked to provide information on data, and then they just make it quickly, and you just have errors, even in the well-defined CMIP data sets. So we have a structure, we have a lot of identifiers on it. But even then, the identifiers are the least reliable. The names which contain a bit of the content are more reliable, but they are wrong. So it's just pleading for good tools to make life for the scientists easy. Otherwise, we will end up with errors which are messing it up more than helping us in the end.
Thanks, Martina. And Mark, did you have a response to that or comment about that?
No, sorry, I didn't take my reaction down.
Okay, so Martina, I think that's a great point. I think one of the things that in listening to all this that I kind of like about the reliquary is that it is an object, hopefully sitting somewhere permanent, that you could version and you could be updating to improve, when you realize something was wrong. Where that's dramatically harder when it's embedded in the supplementary materials off in a publisher in this other world. So I think that that's potentially actually an argument for these things, but maybe not. So Bruce.
Your comment about versioning triggers a thought, which is being very careful about how that's done. Because if I cited a version 1 of a reliquary in a paper, and we've changed the reliquary, how does that tracing happen? It's something that we're struggling with, at least to some degree. And I mean, when published numbers change, trying to change the issuing a new DOI, version 2 of the reliquary potentially has a different identifier, and what are those rules of change? So,
Carolyn.
So this, I think, goes back to sort of our original concept, or even if a definition of a reliquary, which is a specific collection of data set citations. And it occurs to me that once you change one of those citations, it becomes a different reliquary. You have to create a different DOI for the larger collection, because this allows you to customize that reliquary. You can say, okay, well, I used this set of DOIs for this research or this paper, and then I kind of added some, took some away, slapped on a new DOI for that new reliquary, and then here's my new collection. So I think if we want to talk about versioning, we need to go back to the original definition of what is a reliquary, how much change, how much fungibility is allowed at what level, so it stays the same, and at what point does it become a different reliquary.
Okay, and I see Mark just put a citation in the chat that he'd like everybody to read.
Yeah, we talked about this, all these things in great detail in that paper. It's focused on, you know, the reproducibility piece, not the credit piece, but the two work together. And the paper has a dozen or more detailed use cases of implementing this. So I mean, it's real. It happens. It works.
Right. No, I remember the paper. So I wanna back out again because we're headed down some rabbit holes. And I wanna look at, because I think we can solve the versioning, some of these other problems if we can figure out the basic element of what's in a reliquary and sort of how do you make one, and then how do you persist it, right? So let's drop back to the simple use case and try and figure out if we can identify what is this thing. You've now seen 3 examples of sort of what the end product could look like. That obviously doesn't solve anything other than you can see the top of the iceberg now. and so I think the thing that I want to sort of dig into, and we started that conversation at the beginning, is some of these questions of what else is missing, what are, does it meet our goals, right? So one of the things that's come up so far, and many people notice this, that even though I'm a computer scientist, I sort of aimed for the readability and easy to build by any human instead of the machine readability necessarily. Though my nod to the machine readability was trying to have that handle in its own object, so that in fact you could maybe go reconstitute the thing. But let's now have a conversation about this object. So we've heard a few things. We need to change such that it's more flexible to what type of identifier it is in each of these sections. That we should use the data site relationship identifiers, which I think both those, if there are objections to that, I would love to hear them, but it sounded like there was pretty unanimous consent that made sense. And let's see, sorry, Maggie, I'm not good at talking and reading, so I'm going to ask you to just say your comment online. Would that be all right?
Yes, but bear in mind that I'm not good at typing comments and listening to the discussion at the same time. So maybe this was already mentioned. No, I'm just thinking that this is a really neat thing, and the concept of reliquaries will indeed fill this very important sort of gap that exists now in terms of required tooling to manage these large numbers of citations of individual data sets. But I also can see problems in the future with those reliquaries becoming or getting a life of their own afterward, after the fact that they were once defined. And people might just continue, oh, that's a neat reliquary. It contains basically or even more of the data items that I want to cite, but let's just keep reusing it, but I will only refer to a subset of them, etc., etc., etc. Or people want to update only one thing in it, and then they create a whole new object instead of maybe contacting the original reliquary creator to point out that one of these items is no longer existing and you should actually be updating, etc. So I think we also need to have an awareness and a flexible system that involves all stakeholders, including end users, original providers, and of course also the publishers and the indexers here. So let's get started with trying to implement this in practice, but also at the same time keep a close eye on if there are bad practices developing and not just best practices.
Thanks, Maggie. That brings up a great point, because when I was originally thinking about this problem from my project's perspective, it became clear to me that we as a project would want to create some reliquaries. And it seems like in each of our cases, we have cases where the original repository would also build reliquaries, where I might build a reliquary of all the CC by 4 Ameriflex data. And I'd want that people could cite that reliquary and have only cited 100 of the sites within that reliquary, which means a subset of that. And so a core piece of this is we want a method where the individual citations that people have made in their research object, be it a paper or whatever, are identifiable down to the end element of the reliquary, such that you can, and ideally where the indexer is able to then automatically pick up which of the objects in the reliquary are being cited. So it isn't always that, because otherwise every paper is going to have its own reliquary, because they're always going to have some difference from other reliquaries that existed. And so that's been at least one of my assumptions of something we want to have as a core property of these reliquaries.
Deb, this is Mark again.
Yeah.
I think I'm missing something. I don't understand what can't be done with the RDA recommendation that you're trying to do here.
So Mark, you're leading me to our next thing. So hang on to that for just a bit.
I mean, all these issues of versioning, what's a collection, whatever you want to call it, reliquary, they're all addressed and implemented. And I don't, I'm sorry to, like say the problem solved. I hate it when people do that, but I'm just not seeing what the problem is that's not solved.
So Mark, let me give you the view to the next step.
Okay.
So that maybe this will help. The next step is that, I spent a lot of time with each of the individual elements saying one of these is going to work. And dynamic citations was one of my first places where it's like, this is going to be it. But what I realized is that it has all the elements to enable it, but it didn't show me what it looked like. And so I stepped back and tried to just say, what does this thing look like? What does it have in it? How does it work? And then the idea is, once we kind of know what that is supposed to look like, the next step, which Mark, you're going to be one of the key to doing this, is let's then try to take several of these technologies and say, what would a reliquary look like in this technical solution? Can we build a reliquary using the dynamic citations capability? What can collections do it, right? And just looking at some of these RO crates, looking at some of these, what would a reliquary look like in this technology? And the idea would be that at the next meeting, we're looking then at actual implementations of these reliquaries. That's part of why we needed these 3 examples, to give people, something to start from, to say, okay, what do I have to be able to represent? Oh, my system works. Let me just show you what it would look like in my system. That makes sense, Mark?
Almost. I guess I'm still struggling with the term reliquary. And I realized, that was deliberately used to not have preconceived notions with it, but it seems like preconceived notions have been built around it now. Isn't it just a arbitrary collection of data, but usually from multiple sources?
Yes. And
So
we
like
want it to have and we want it to have a specific property. So the one thing that makes it a little bit different is we want a specific property that the collection of things in that are individually citable and indexed by the indexer as primary citations, not as a secondary citation where the paper cited that collection, and then it's up to the individual, other people, not the indexers, to figure out that in fact that should have been a primary citation for them. So Maggie,
So-
you're next.
Can I make
Sorry.
sure I just understood what you said?
Yeah.
So a reliquary is a collection of things that you can cite the subcomponents.
As primary citations in a research
Primary.
object. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
That is the most fundamental core difference. Maggie.
Yeah, so I was involved in that RDA group that created the collections recommendation. And one of the things that we discussed a lot in that group but felt was outside of our remit for that particular working group was exactly coming up with good ideas for tools that could be working on these collection objects that we're saying should be specified in a specific way. And one of them was really about an idea we had already then was really what you were now talking about as the reliquary concept. So I mean, I think you could still do all of these things basing the whole thing on that metadata model that was proposed for collections by the RDA group, which would maybe extended a little bit with a few more of these relational aspects and qualified references. But I agree with Mark that it's sort of based on the same basic needs to identify things that at some point are said to belong together, and also allow them for complete harvesting of, for instance, the author information, etc., so that you could collect that and use that in usage statistics calculations and stuff. But so yeah, I am a bit bemused, I have to say, by this whole thing. But not to say that this is a bad way or a bad thing, that the discussion that is happening now. I welcome it. I just wish that we could have had that already at that time when we were proposing all of these things in the RDA context when the recommendations were finalized.
Thanks, Maggie. Carolyn?
I want to go back to something that Mark, you said a few minutes ago, is one word, and it really kind of triggered me. So your use of the word arbitrary. These are not arbitrary collections. These are highly defined and curated collections of data sets used for a specific purpose within a publication or research product. And the concept is to be able to use these reliquaries whole cloth, to be able to port them. It just look at the data sets cited and say, wow, I'd like to reproduce that research. I'd like to use that collection for what I'm doing. I would find this useful. And this goes back to what we were talking about with Bruce with the versioning, that either you can use the 50, the entire 50 or 150 or however many there are as a curated collection for whatever you want, or you could take that reliquary and modify it slightly, add a new DOI, and that would be a new version of that particular. You can even name the collections, but these are highly curated and highly specific collections for
Right.
research.
I only meant arbitrary, like in the computer science sense, not the. I mean, in the sense that it can be any random collection, not predetermined. And so a curated collection is indeed a carefully curated collection, and it's not random, but the idea is, from a computer science thing, we want to be able to deal with any sort of collection. So by arbitrary, I mean just it could be, you might curate it in one way, I might curate it another way. You might assemble some set, I might assemble. So the point is that we want to be able to do however it happens. That's all.
Exactly. Yeah, these are purpose built.
Yeah, but so it doesn't. I don't mean random. I just mean that it can handle any kind of collection.
Right.
however
The
it's done.
reliquary structure can handle any kind of data set coming in.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all I meant by arbitrary.
And just to be clear, at least for me, if I have my dream, it's that we figure out that something that already exists can actually instantiate reliquaries, and that it just takes adding some property that makes it that you're explicitly saying when you cite this thing, the objects in it are being cited, or some number of the objects in it are being cited, and that these should be indexed as primary. James.
Yeah, I think what Madison in the chat has said regarding the RDA dynamic citation intended for systems to create, whereas the reliquary allows sort of it's almost for data centers to be able to create something for their own sort of reusability, as opposed to someone externally coming in collecting from ourselves, from Plankia, from Bicodemo, or wherever they get their data from, and allowing them to be. It's allowing the user to define the data set they're using and being able to then cite the collection that they've created. They don't have to have the clever technology to be able to say it's from this, the machine technology. They can just say, I've got all these data, these are where they come from, this is how I'm going to cite it. And that I think is also important, is that ease for users.
Thanks, James. Maggie.
Sorry, that was an old marker.
Okay, I thought I'd seen you take it down and then put it back up. So. All right. So are there other? I'm a little shocked that there aren't more like, God, this won't work. So I'm actually incredibly heartened that we're arguing about how we might build this and how we might version it and some of these other questions. I'm not hearing fundamental disagreement with the underlying idea, the underlying sort of simple instantiations of this. So I think there's sort of two different directions we could go at this point, and it may cause that we need to split into two subgroups or something like that. I don't know, but let's talk about sort of where we go from here. We've got these first guesses at this is sort of my view of what an end reliquary might look like. There's one direction where we need to look at how might it be instantiated, right? Ideally, there's some existing mechanisms where, in fact, we could instantiate these and then talk through how does this get treated with the right properties such that it has this additional property of that these are primary citations, and I'm telling people that that's the case. So that's sort of one direction. I think the other is sort of thinking about this object in the world and sort of the mechanics, the aspects of sort of the strategy side of it. How is this used? What are all those properties about? If a person wanted to be able to make one, what's sort of the way that happens? If an indexer, talking to the indexers about how do we make this thing actually indexable in the way that we want it to be? What are the changes that need to happen? And maybe it's 5 conversations that need to come out of this, right? There's all these different sides to this to making it actually work. And I guess I'd love to hear some thoughts about how people would like to move forward. I've kind of given you the broad outline of some of the things that I guess are in my mind of how we might go forward from here. I'd like to hear from the rest of you how you'd like to move forward in this space. Carolyn.
One way to do this, and Deb, you really eloquently outlined our next steps and next phases, all sort of the different ideas that have popped up during this meeting. Maybe we could take a little bit of time to prioritize and kind of capture those ideas, and then figure out what to do first and what to do next. That's one way to do it. Or we can take the 4 or 5 concepts that you outlined, and we can ask for volunteers to take on those simultaneously. So we could either kind of do a vertical approach or a horizontal approach. Either way is fine with me. I just, like you, I'm really excited that those concepts, it's like, how do we do this? Not if we should do this, is moving forward. So this is great.
It worries me that Mark has now gone silent.
Okay, I'll chime in. I'm trying to eat breakfast at the same time. That's a problem. Oh, I noticed that Jorg has his hand up. I was just going to say, I think the indexing question is the tougher one, or the less solved one. I mean, just standard issue data citations aren't indexed very well, or software citations. And that's a bigger social problem. There's not an obvious technical solution to that one. So that I think is the most challenging, critical piece.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Jorg.
Yeah, I had a similar comment. I think it's about making this practical, making it possible to index tens, hundreds of thousands of items in such a reliquary. Yeah, so that needs to tie into the existing infrastructure in some way, so they can be registered accordingly, that they have all the relevant metadata and all of this. So yeah, it comes down to a lot of the practical questions of what's doable, I guess. And it might be useful if maybe people from relevant infrastructures, where that's Crossref or DataCite, might tie into that discussion as well.
Thanks, Jorg. Shelley.
We're fortunate to have those folks as part of this team, and they have just been waiting to get to this point. So yeah, I think we can start to, dig in.
Okay, so I'm hearing the beginning maybe of a groundswell to sort of, before we jump too far into thinking about the implementations, toward going after understanding with some of the publishers and indexers how we might make sure that this operates in a way that is going to allow it to work in the way we're thinking of. Would that
So
be?
can I ask a really naive question? Because I honestly don't entirely understand how indexing the citations work. So like if we look at traditional paper citations without DOIs, maybe just referencing a published book, and that's essentially manually indexed. I mean, services like Crossref go through the reference lists and capture these things and put them in their database and establish the linkages. Shelley's nodding. So is that a true statement, what I said? And then it's becoming more automated as we have more persistent identifiers, but it's still, they have to be in the reference list. They have to be captured in some way by Crossref or DataCite. There's no magic crawling, indexing that we like in a Google-ish sense.
There's a couple ways. So if you come at it from the journal point of view, and we know there's a lot of brokenness there, we're actually going to have, there's a Force 11 journal task force that's going to have a paper in F1000 soon that will walk, and Matt's part of it. I'm pretty sure, Matt, you've been in this meetings. Matt's part of it as well. And we're going to make sure that the fixes that are going in place right now to make that process smoothed out, and that's like a whole conversation on its own. But those things are in place for automatic linking of data citations and software citations to the paper using Crossref event data, which has also been somewhat broken, very broken, less broken now. And to work. So what we do know from that experience is the least work the journal has, the better for this to happen. Another way to make linkage happen is coming through the repository registry, where you can register those related, like if you relate your reliquary to the publication, that is also a way to index, automate in an automated way. And we also know Web of Science, and Megan's here, that there is manual mechanisms, but those are also really hard. So the more automated we can make it, the better. And until, and this is all evolving simultaneously. So, yeah.
So is anyone looking beyond the publication? Because the issue I have with this approach is that it still makes the scientific publication and the reference list really the primary object. And in many cases, the data set is the primary object, and and papers are generated from the data, not the other way around.
Well, so if you register the collection, right? If the collection's registered and the DOI comes from DataCite, that is a primary registry activity. And you can then update that to link to the paper. That also is perfectly okay.
Okay, but pretend there's no paper. I use that data set to develop a new instrument or a new policy or build a new dam or whatever.
Then you can link it to software, or you can link it to your presentation, or you can link it to, if there's no paper, it's still a thing, because DataCite is a viable DOI registry agency to create first-class products.
But we always have to capture those linkages, right? That seems to be the key piece, that this data set is associated in some way with this other product.
Oh, not necessarily. So I don't think we should propagate that. I think that if you register a data site, that stands on its own, period.
Right. But then, and so I register a data set, and then 5 years later, somebody uses it in some creative way that doesn't involve a paper. And I want to be able to identify that, as long as they reference the DOI in some webbish way, I should be able to identify that, right? I mean, that would be my goal.
I would take that use case off this particular group, because I think that's a viable use case where how do we create linkages with things two directional? Like if we go to, I see Matt's excited, maybe Matt has something to say, but if we, like, for instance, if you have a preprint or an iPoster or an oral presentation, how do you link to the data set that supported that, for instance?
Yeah,
I think maybe is what you're saying.
And to me, the purpose of this group is really focused on credit and impact. And if we really want to look at credit and impact, especially in the earth sciences, we need to get well beyond the stupid publication, because earth science data have much more impact outside of literature than they do within literature.
Okay, that's great, but let's get this reliquary figured out. And then we can link it to whatever you want. So that's what we're here at, that complex data citation. Let's get that to work. And then, yes, I'm with you, and start a working group, and I'm there. Yeah, we fully agree. Yeah, because what's in the paper is not all the data, right? So all of the data matters here, and getting the researchers to submit all of the, yeah, I'm totally with you. But
yeah, and the paper didn't direct the firefighter that saved somebody's life, I mean,
yes,
so
exactly. But think about the reliquary solving problems around, like, notebooks. Like, the notebook has the data, the software, the text, the this. How do we give credit to all of those things jammed into one product? The executable environments are going to be really hard to document. So this has, and the samples have no way to get into a paper whatsoever. You can put IGSNs in here, and this will be a way to recognize samples associated with something. It could be a paper. So yeah, but I'm with you. We need other ways to get credit.
And sorry, I've been reading the chat while you guys have been discussing this, and I think, I mean, Mark, it's a great point, and it's already starting. A few people have sort of pointed out that there is potential that if we get these reliquaries right, that they have the potential to help with the problem that you're pointing out as well, because they do stand separate from papers. It would be the idea, and therefore, you know, you could, when I was building the dam, you know, all the things that the objects that I use to help me build the dam are then a reliquary, and I don't know, maybe I imprint the DOI or whatever identifier I've used for the reliquary on the side of the dam, so that, you know, 10,000 years from now, somebody can be looking at that and go, ah, let me look up what the heck they used. But that's, you know, I think that you know, so I think it has potential. You're right, that's not where we were headed in terms of the use cases, and I don't want to divert us too far into other potential use cases to get here, but we should at least be cognizant that there might be some alternate ways that these reliquaries could be used, and at least try not to make it impossible to use them in those ways. So if there are changes that make sense that enable broad additional uses, that's great. But I also don't want to derail the process. Sound good? Okay, I'm seeing nods, and since Mark isn't on video, I can't. All right. So is there? Okay. There we go. Thank you, Mark. All right. So is there any interest in from any of the folks who have technology solutions in going after trying to just prototype an implementation of some of these example reliquaries? Is there anyone interested in trying that?
So
Okay.
are you
What kind of answer
like,
said?
are you saying that, like, for instance, James would match up with somebody?
Sure. You know, where someone, you know, maybe it's Mark and the dynamic data citations, where Mark would say, hey, let me take the, you know, the BODC example and show you what that would look like as a dynamic data citation, and then talk through what, you know, is there anything missing? Does this all work?
Okay.
So
And we've
Justin.
heard-
Yeah, apologies for being late. I had another meeting, but I managed to get back across this one. There's two threads to this. One is actually developing the concept to get to something to build. And I think it's a really useful process in doing some peer review amongst us of what we're proposing in our approach. And then a second thread is prototyping. And then I'm kind of looking at Maggie a little bit, and I'm wondering from our side, is there something we could look at as part of the European Open Science Cloud? Because it seems to be quite closely related to what we do in other projects. Got a tip from Maggie.
Yeah, possibly, but I wonder, I don't think it's a good idea to dive into it at the whole European Open Science Cloud level. I think one will have to really try it out in maybe the data clusters that we have there. Unfortunately, our projects are coming to an end relatively soon. Either some of them have already ended, and the others are ending at the end of this year or early next year. But it's certainly something that I think we can build up a reference group from, that can test things and then can comment on any proposals that are there and give feedback. Maybe that is one way forward. I mean, of course, someone has to really come up with these concrete examples. Starting, I mean, you already did a lot of work in this direction, but also looking then at things like who is it that is going to provide these services? Is it just going to be another part or another way of when you register things at data site, you just include this. Also, if there are any additions needed in the metadata model and things like that, or can we just use the way that exactly as it is already now, then we can just get going, right? Try things out. And then informing the indexers, but because I think we have, it must be an iterative process, right? I mean, something has to be there on the table. People have to try it out, check it. Does this work within our context? Do our publishers allow this to be used in the way that we intended it to be used? And again, all these governance issues, who is in charge of maybe checking whether it's okay to reuse an old reliquary for new purposes and all these things. There needs to be best practices formulated. Of course, there is no reliquary police because we can't involve the Vatican or any other religious authority in this, right? So we all have to come to a good consensus and a good agreement and try to sort of police it within our communities.
Oh, I definitely want the Swiss Guard to be policing this.
You find yourself at the end of one of those weird things. They have bladed things on long sticks if you don't follow the rules, right?
All right. Any other comments or Mark?
I don't control any data, so it's hard for me to volunteer to do anything. But I'm happy to work with people who do control data. And just wanted to note that the data citation working group, dynamic data citation working group, will be meeting at International Data Week. And the whole purpose of when we meet these days is to walk through implementation examples and see how we can help with implementations. So if anybody's interested in that and is attending IDW or the plenary piece of IDW, that's something that you might be interested in. My suspicion, unfortunately, is that IDW is not going to be well attended, but something to keep in mind.
James.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, well, with Mark, I don't know if you want to go through our example and see what other option there is, but because we have the example there and just sort of maybe tidying it up to see what we can get. I'm happy to do that with anyone if that's the way forward.
Okay, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And I really recommend that you take a look at that paper I referenced, and there's a section in there on Ocean Networks Canada, which I think has a very similar sort of use case as you have. Yeah, it'd be really good to get Raina Jenkins involved in this because Ocean Networks Canada has done some amazing work because they sort of had the opportunity to kind of reconsider their whole archive. And so Raina has used this as an opportunity to apply current best practices to a long existing archive, which is really kind of exciting.
Okay.
Thanks, Melissa.
Mark.
I saw your note. And Raina has been attending with us, so. Yeah.
So I think I think there'll be some initial work. We're missing, I think, anybody from RO crates. I think they were interested in potentially looking at showing what an implementation of a reliquary might look like in an RO crate. But I think the other effort that what I'm hearing some consensus around maybe going after is talking to the publishers and the indexers next about what needs to be in this to make it work for them. And what are some of the rules that need to exist or other pieces to make this possible, right? Because as is already being pointed out, it may require that, in fact, a reliquary is, in fact, boutique, that it's always for one particular purpose, and that it is never meant to be reused. But some of those things would come from really what the indexers and publishers need in order to make them work in the way that we'd like them to work, which may dictate some of those things. So I think that would be the next conversation. So I guess
I'm here from Ted and Francis. I guess if you have questions you want to ask about publishing and how that stuff works, I can try and answer some of those questions, as we've still got a bit of time left. I don't know if you have more things you wanted to cover in this session. From what you're saying, it sounds as if the reliquaries are not going to be things you're going to look to try and publish as such, more that this is something that you'll want to cite from some other kind of publication, so a research article or data paper or something else. So I asked a question in the chat about just exactly like what kind of citation that would require, but I think Shelley said that the metadata would be more of a collection. So it sounds like there is already functionality in the way that references are tagged to give these like special attention. I'm not sure whether there's, like you were talking about attributing citations to every object within a reliquary and how that would work, and whether that's in the publisher's gift even. Like, I think that might need some more thinking about.
Yeah,
yeah,
don't want the
citing a
publisher
book toward the
doing
chapter.
anything.
Like, if you think about a different mechanism, like if you cite a book, toward the individual chapters get cited, like they don't, like, but yeah, I don't know, that's probably not a good example, but yeah, I guess if there's specific you want to talk about, I'm happy to try and help.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. And my hope was that the publishers would have nothing to do this type, because that would mean it would actually function quickly, just knowing how slowly we all move. But there's an APA style type for collection. We can just, it looks a lot, it'll fit right into our mechanisms, no problem. And then we'd really be looking at folks like Adapon and Crossref to catch the collection on the other side, and then heading into Scholar. So we should definitely have that conversation. We should bring in Web of Science and folks like that. So yeah, but I'm very hopeful that it will be a slide right through. So yeah.
I want to say I'm happy to help.
Perfect. Thanks, Megan. I knew you would. I knew you would. So thanks.
Anyone else on this call that wants to?
Oh, and Andreas, we'll grab you too, because I think Open Air and Scholix will be really important for making sure things happen. So we'll pull you into.
And I'm guessing we can convince Jorg to help out as well, since he's got some experience in this space.
That would be fun.
Sure.
You'll let
Yes.
him come and play with the publishers again. That would be nice.
Great.
Thanks.
Okay, so I guess the next question related to this, would you like to do this? Would the whole group like to participate, or would you like us to go off as a subgroup with some of these folks and get to a place where we have a proposal of what the next step is, and then
I think the publishers are going to need something to look at. So if maybe there could be a couple things happening where we can actually touch, and I know Pangea has some, Uvi's not on, but I know Pangea has several examples that they actually can create, but don't recommend it because there's no credit that happens. So we could reach to Pangea to help us here. And I'm pretty sure Martina wants to see an IPCC example. And I think that would be very motivational for a journal give that a go to try to push it through. And we can do test papers. I can imagine my team rolling their eyes going, oh my God, a test paper, but we could try to do a test paper and see if we could pull it all the way through.
Okay, but before we could do that, we'd need an actual implementation. And so I think then maybe the right next step is actually to work with the indexers to actually look at what's going to have to be there for their end to actually pick it back up.
Yep.
Before we talk to the publishers. So
yeah,
maybe that is the subgroup that we need to form.
And doing it together with DataCite and Crossref, I think that those folks, yep, I think that would be the right thing to do, because everybody, all of the metadata has to flow through, and that would be the pieces that we would need. Yeah. And I'd pull an add upon while we were there, knowing how influential they are with platforms.
Okay, so what I'm hearing come out, and a lot of you are being silent, so please speak up or write in the chat if you have counter proposals or other
I'm just
things.
going through my workload for the next 6 months, and I'm thinking,
we all are. But this is, if we don't keep moving this forward, it's, it's going to have been a good idea that just stalled in the midst of being a good idea.
I think if we chunk this up into smaller pieces, kind of more manageable, boiling the ocean is not an option right now. So just, things we can comfortably achieve in 6 weeks or 8 weeks.
Okay, so my suggestion at the moment is that we try to get together some conversations with DataCite, Crossref, a few other groups that would have to have all the pieces there to be able to pick it up and then actually turn that into counts of citations. And if we do that and we have those conversations and figure out what else, and it may bring together properties, it may bring together additional items in the reliquary, that we do those conversations using these examples we have, not instantiating them into other things, because we're likely going to find out things that affect how we would implement them very fundamentally. So that looks like the next step. And I think that, in the interim, if people want to play around with starting to implement them, like Mark and James and Justin, if you want to get together and try just looking at for the current thing, what would that look like? I think that would be very useful and great to bring back to the group as well. So I think that, are there other thoughts of things that we should be doing next that aren't where I just proposed?
I do feel that we need to let more people know that we're working on this. Martina reminded me and Maggie reminded me of some folks that are thinking about this in other groups, and that we need to let others know that we have this piece of the puzzle that we're trying to figure out, so that they can we can collaborate. So I think that's part of the RDA working group and getting the message out there.
Okay, and yes, Shelley, I've relied heavily on you and Carolyn and Chris to also help hugely with that. I'm less connected than you guys are. I just have a desperate use case. All right, Mark.
Just to follow up on what Shelley was saying, the ESIP data citation cluster, research artifact citation cluster, should have a paper out in EOS very soon. I hope it's our final revisions. We've been working with the editors, talking all about credit for different types of research artifacts. So we don't get into this reliquary concept in these, but it's obviously closely related to this group. And in that paper, we mention this group and say this group is, looking for involvement. So that'll be a bit of outreach.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And I have been
when the article comes out.
Yeah, I'm a lurker in that group, so I have been reading the drafts. No, that paper's really coming together. So thank you. Maggie.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think it's extremely important that this group and also the other groups that are working on similar things are not seen as being strictly tied to a given region or a given discipline of research or things like that. I've been trying to push for more people from my network to join this group and these workshops, and at least to lurk, as you say, Deb. But they've been saying, oh, it's just these Americans over there doing stuff. It's not appropriate for people in Europe.
And whatever we're coming up with should be as broadly implementable as possible.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that the groups are themselves are somehow seen as regional, which is not true, not at all true, but that's a perception that many people have. So maybe that's also a need to be more proactive in terms of how you disseminate events and the cross-link between groups, etc. And maybe it would also be good to have some kind of notice board place where all these new papers, etc., there would be a news item saying, oh, there's this new study coming out of this context. It's available now here, just to make it easier for people to navigate this sometimes rather treacherous archipelago of PID-related stuff.
Thanks, Maggie. And Mark asked if we will have a session in Seoul. And yes, Shelley's been hard at work making sure that happens. So Shelley, do you have the information about that yet, or?
I'm sure I do. I will dig it up and make sure when we share the recording, I'll make sure it's in there.
Okay, thanks. Megan.
I just want to say that if you're planning to talk to indexers such as myself, based on what you have now, my question is essentially on when you say what you have now, do you mean the examples that we were looking at today? Because there has been a decent amount of discussion in here that keeps coming up in these meetings about the numbers of items that would go into a reliquary. And some people have been saying tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions. So in the examples that we've seen today, that's not the case that I'm seeing, but it's going to change an indexer's perspective if you start talking about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions, because that involves a great deal more of processing and work on the parts of indexers. Because say an indexer is accustomed to processing 50 references in an article. If they have to assume that one of those articles will then need to be unzipped and will have 10,000 things in it, then you might need to hire more people, right, to be able to do that. So I'm just saying that if we are going to be dealing with the examples that we're seeing now, that I think that caveat of numbers has to be sort of put on there. I'm not saying what the ballpark is or what the maximum or minimum number of objects is that would be in a reliquary, but I think it needs to be kept in mind that when you're asking the question of what are publishers capable of doing, what are indexers capable of doing, that the numbers do have an effect when it comes to that. So that's all.
Thank you. No, excellent point. Because you're right. We were all making ones that were easy for us to do manually, but you're right. I think particularly in the biology use cases and in some of the climate cases, there can be hundreds of thousands, millions potentially in there.
But I think it's important to recognize you only care when somebody uses it. I mean, you don't necessarily need to have identifiers for the millions of objects in your reliquary until someone pulls out and says, I want to use this particular sub-object or aggregate object. So you could have potentially millions, but that's the whole glory of dynamic data citation. You don't have to create a bunch of identifiers in advance. You only create them as needed as defined by the user.
Well, it's my understanding here that, and Deb, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that I think that Deb brought up earlier that this idea that that this is sort of, these are primary citation objects, and every single thing within the reliquary is going to be a primary citation object. So in that way, it's slightly different from this dynamic data citation case that you're discussing.
I don't think it is, because something doesn't become a primary citation object until it is cited. So yeah, you can put identifiers on all sorts of things, but if it's never referenced, it doesn't matter. It doesn't become a first-class object until it actually enters the discourse.
Sure, I agree with that. And maybe I'm misunderstanding here. It was my understanding that one of the purposes of this was to extend the reference section in order to
Right.
to cite more things. So if that is the case, then it would be relevant in that case.
Yeah, it is definitely that. My point is that, so my example of MAST, the Space Telescope Archive, has, millions and millions of observations from multiple space telescopes. But we don't put an identifier on every single one of those things and register them with DataCite or whatever, until someone makes a query and says, I want this subset or this aggregation of observations. Then a DOI is generated and registered. But so until the user says that I want to reference something, we don't create a DOI. In a simpler use case, maybe it's easier that there's 10 obvious subunits within a reliquary. Still don't like the term, sorry. That you pre-assign DOIs because you know that people are going to, they're just like chapters in a book or something. So I think it could go either way. You could do it a priori or sort of this dynamic on demand. But the point is, you shouldn't have to worry about it until it actually enters the scholarly discourse and becomes a first-class object.
I understand. Yes, I follow you. I'm just talking about in the case where it does become part of the scholarly discourse.
Right.
You would do in that case. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. All right.
Right. Yeah, that's a clarification I was going to make. I think you're both right, but the reality is there could then be reliquaries that have millions of objects that are instantiated with identifiers that are supposed to be primary citations. And if we believe that that is a real use case, we should elucidate that as part of what are things that the indexer should consider to be possible as a reliquary. Maggie.
Yeah, I would just say that I think that the statement that the reliquaries, or whatever they should be called, are not created until they are really needed for the scholarly discourse needs to be a bit modified, because obviously I can see many usages of this reliquary definition or the defined reliquary already during the research process, or the because you would need it internally for instance, governing workflows and other things that are then going to result in this paper. So there just has to be a little bit of nuance there, I think. That you may well register and get the PID for your reliquary quite early on in the research process.
Okay, so we're coming to the end of time for this meeting. Thank you all for just fantastic contributions. I think this really is starting to move the conversation forward. I'm really excited. And I think, so I will work with Shelley and the rest of us to start figuring out a conversation with some of the folks involved with the indexing side of things to see if we can sort of nail down some of the properties that we need to have in these reliquaries to make this even possible from their perspective. And so we'll probably send out a note asking for people interested in participating, and then figure out what size group we're going to have. But I think that's the next follow-up on this. besides the RDA group, which will be meeting in Seoul. And I didn't see anybody raise their hand about that they're coming to International Data Week, but that clearly could be a place where it could at least get mentioned that we're working on this. And I think Maggie brought up a really great point about that the perception right now is that this is an American thing and not international. And so I think that I think we need to have a conversation about how we change that perception. And I think some of it is one of the most visible things is we've got 4 Americans as the people organizing this, and I think we might want to rethink the organizing structure such that it includes a broader diversity of locations that people came from, because our group does, and it should be that our organizing committee does as well. So thank you for bringing that up, Maggie. I think that's a really important point, because this only works if it is international and perceived as mattering to everybody, and not just North America or the US or some small subset of folks. So I think those are the 3 next steps from my perspective. Again, I really want to thank everybody for participating, and particularly to the 3 use cases for having put together these examples. I think this was really fantastic to see 3 different potential reliquaries in instantiation and talk through sort of what those might look like. So thank you very much for that work. And so with that, I think, Shelley, did you have any parting comments that you want to make?
Oh, I'm delighted. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you all. This has been fantastic. Oh, Justin, did you have something you want to say?
So thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll let you know when the next meeting is, and when we can get together something with some folks who can represent the indexing. Megan already left. Oh, no, Megan's there. Megan, it sounds like you're definitely on the recruiting list for who we're going to include. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.